let's look at this one where you guys are about half and half on who got the right answer here. Which best characterizes Mbiti's use of sasa and zamani in the book? They are Swahili words, as he tells us. And I think I mentioned this in the one of my lectures, my little video lectures. He writes on page 21, to avoid the thought association of the English words past, present, and future. So he's not going to write you a whole book about African traditional religions talking about the past and the present, because those terms do not convey the richness that he's wanting to use. I propose to use two Swahili words, sasa and zamani. So he explains to you that these words, he describes them in the Swahili so that you have a sense of their richness, and he continues to use those words because they are better for our heads. Right? Have you enjoyed a little bit since we read that, thinking about sasa and zamani? Right? Instead of just past and future? So, that's what was behind that answer. And the anthropocentric question, more got it wrong than got it right. So the anthropocentric ontology is from page 16. There we go. On page 16, you see an entire discussion at the top of the page. Expressed anthropocentrically, God is the originator and sustainer of man. The spirits explain the destiny of man. Man is the center of this ontology. The animals, plants, and natural phenomena and objects constitute the environment in which man lives, provides a means of existence, and if need be, man establishes a mystical relationship with them. This anthropocentric ontology is a complete unity or solidarity which nothing can break up or destroy. So, while many of you selected that God is the central organizing force, that would be a theocentric ontology. He is telling us that as in their ontology, man is the center of it, in that God stories are God's stories about the creation of man. Man is the center of the focus. That is an anthropocentric focus. All right, you did great with transcendent. You did great with time. Did I want to say something about passed on? I did. All right, with the passed on question, how is knowledge of God passed on in ATRs? Many of you said sacred specialists who have exclusive access to such information. That is an inaccurate understanding, because the proverbs, the songs, the prayers, the names, the myths, knowledge of God is happening in the homestead, parent to child, grandparent to grandchild, proverb by proverb. You get in a problem in the market, people will pull out these proverbs and use them strategically to tell you what God would have to say about that price you just charged them. So all kinds of knowledge of God is being passed on through oral tradition among the people. Then I want to get down to mountains. You did great. What about, cosmology, with the cosmology question. If you got this one wrong, which of the following places in the natural world do not hold religious significance? And if you chose the underworld, then you missed the import of the characterization of autochthony. So any word that starts out with CHTH ought to catch your attention, right? What word starts with CHTH? Chthonic. What a great word. You ought to trip over that every time and be curious, like, well, what is that word? And then figure out what is autochthony, autochthonic, right? So chthonic comes from the Greek, means both the abundance of and the fertility of soil, as well as the grave. and the word auto in front of it means spontaneous. So the spontaneous things that come from the earth. Autochthony are those things, if you can imagine an ancestor story about how people arrived in Wyoming as having actually been born from the ground, there's certainly a lot in the Crow tradition regarding the buffalo being born from under the ground. So buffalo are autochthonic in the Crow mythology. And so underworld is in fact part of the religious cosmology. It does hold religious significance. And autochthony, another word you should hear when you hear that, is indigenous. So that which comes from the land, is of the land, belongs to the land, in the same way that a plant is an indigenous to an area. So that's why the underworld, and you will find the Tree of Life, that you'll see those references if you go back through and think this through. Caves, you'll see that the underworld has a religious significance. All right, so then we go down to mountains, and we've got quite a big gray here. That this was one of those not questions. So I get to ask you, give you 3 ways of thinking about it that are correct, and there's an answer that's not correct. That way, what we're reinforcing is the material through the question. So, but some of you thought the fact that mountains are closer to the sky and therefore closer to God did not reflect what Mbiti said about mountains. And he's got 2 sections on mountains. But you bet height matters. Like, where did Moses go? Where's the medicine wheel in Wyoming? Mountains across many cultures. We think about these cosmological landscapes. We think about religious life as being on a symbolic map of the earth. Then the fact that mountains are closer to the sky has often been considered auspicious, powerful. So we'll see that they are part of a religious cosmology. What Mbiti's clear about, and what plenty of you clearly recognized, is that the mountains are not God, right? Nobody is venerating the mountain as God. Rather, the mountain becomes an auspicious place for proximity to spirits who can then relay messages, perhaps to the divine. All right, so let's go down. You guys did well. Let me just note that Madagascar and Tome are not continents. Asia and Europe are the continents that Africa is connected to by the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. The transition, you did well on that. Let's get down to works of God. There's another rough one. This answer I think I could have written better. One more reason we're getting a redo. When I wrote God created a perfect world, but humans have slowly eroded it, I was trying to suggest that God was done, right? He created it, and then we're slowly eroding it, rather than the answer I'm looking for, that God's works are continuous and they are ongoing like human births. So the sense that God is still active in the world is what I was trying to get at. And because they have an anthropomorphic ontology, it's not described as humans are messing up the perfect world that God made, right? God made the world for the humans. The humans are the center of this world, so they don't get blamed with ruining things. Certainly humility regarding ways that the rupture happened from God. People get knocked for their foibles, but not as though God made it perfect and we messed it up. All right, down here to reified. There we go. Tribal identity. Many of you chose as an answer that according to Chittister, a reified image of tribal identity is an accurate and helpful image that improves our ability to understand the power of ATRs. So you have misunderstood his point. Once he is saying, so reified, what does it mean? The kind of freezing and making rigid of an image. And he is saying that it was part of colonial conquest to take what were fluid, dynamic political alliances and instead, using the European Enlightenment idea of race, turn these into reified tribal images and then read yourself through colonialism by pitting people one against the other. So that the colonial image, Chittister is not saying that's a good way to understand tribal identity. Rather that if we understand that there was greater fluidity before colonial conquest between people, and that colonial conquest created names, created divisions, that once you have Hutus and Tutsis, then in the more recent times, killing each other, this is a product of having categories that used to be fluid. They were reified and people then begin to think that's an identity worth killing and dying. Initiation. Which of the following is not an accurate interpretation of initiation rituals? Boys and girls undergo them. They cannot become fully human in the eyes of their communities is an accurate interpretation of initiation rituals. What is not is this idea of a sexuality that is taboo. Rather, as you've seen, all kinds of elements of sexuality are part of the initiation because sexuality is never put into that kind of nasty place. Rather, it is put into a proper role for boys and girls, men and women. Granted, plenty of hierarchy regarding male dominance, but sex is good. Procreation is good. This stuff is celebrated, not put under closets. Dying. I look at this last one as the Lion King effect, where a lot of you chose there is no death, only an eternal circle of life. I'm kind of thinking of the circle of life issue. There is, in fact, death. It's simply that it's a process that takes generations until the memory of the living dead have been lost by the family, and at that point then, as they move back into Zamani, then they have died. And that's their understanding of it. And when we think about our own culture, you might think, how many generations can I go back? And the idea that those grandparents, great-grandparents that you remember, recall, would still be part in an African worldview of the living dead, whereas those that are far enough back that maybe you could find it on paper, because we do so much with paper, but that you really don't have them in your memory. And if you think of this as oral traditions where what mattered was who you could remember, most of those communities can go back 5, 6 generations, which is quite different than those of us who, because of paper, tend to forget names and no longer tell the stories that would keep those people part of our landscape. All right, that's a review.